failing spectacularly more times than they succeed.
If I could give any advice to any podcaster who might possibly be listening, it's don't pay attention to the numbers. Don't go down that rabbit hole, because it'll drive you insane. They make no sense. we've been
I agree with that.
We've been knocking on Joe Rogan's door, and we've been at the bottom of the list so many times that I just gave up on it. I do it and I have fun, and I hope people listen. And if not, then you're just talking to me and Gord, but that's kind of cool. I did want to ask, just because I'm curious as a writer, are you? I'm very much sit down with a pen and go and see where it's going. Like, I start with a very loose premise. Do you have a really good idea of what you're writing before you write it? Or do you,
for me, I have a bullet point outline of every 1,000 words. So every 1,000 words of what I write, I sort of have a loose idea of what is going to happen. So it'll say on the left side of a page, it'll say like 0, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and it will go up to as long as I think the book is going to be, usually somewhere between 70 and 120,000 words. And every 10,000 words, I will have a main plot point that I have to hit. So
cool.
The book won't make sense without it. It won't pace without it. But I do have the smaller plot points between 1,000 and 10,000, let's say, that I can sort of move around as I work, because even though I have an outline, I tend to cram a lot of things together, condense things, expand some other things, and I need that freedom. But I also want to know where I'm going. Last year, I tried to do a outline without plotting again, which I used to do back in like 2016 and 17. But I was sitting in front of my computer, and after about 3 months, I had written maybe 3,000 words. So I now make sure that I do that outline. I actually did that outline for myself, and within a week, I had written 20,000 words. And that's usually what I write, about 5,000 words a day when I'm writing. And so I have been a non-plot person, or a pantser, as they call them. It would take me about a year to write a book, maybe 6 months to write a book. When I started plotting, I could do that same book in 2 to 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
I wrote my last book was 90,000 words, and I wrote it, edited it, and sent it to my editor in less than a month.
That's
so usually
amazing.
A book will. Yeah, but it's really because I have the plot, and then I know where I'm going.
I'm going to have to try that, because with mine takes place in 3 different time periods. And when I got to the end and I was so happy I was finished, the chronology makes no sense whatsoever. I had to pretty much go right back to square one and start again. So that outline would have helped me quite a bit.
Yeah, and I have 4 characters usually as main characters in my book, so I want to make sure they all get adequate chapter time. I want to make sure their plots make sense, that they are driving forward to the end, and I want to make sure that that the things that I'm seeding at the beginning of the book pay off towards the end of the book. I know Neil Gaiman says that the second draft is just making the first draft make sense, and make people think that you were that you knew what you were doing all along. But I like to at least have an outline of the book beforehand, so that I know what the major plot points are, because there are some major plot points that your book is going to hinge on, and I want to know what those are, even if the rest of the book doesn't make any sense. Or I don't use any other thing. I want to at least know where the next driver is. So I like to think of a book. I come from movies and TV. I live in LA. So I think of it as a sequence. So every roughly 10 minutes of a movie is a sequence. And so there's rising action, there's falling action, there's climaxes. There's something that is driving the plot forward to that end of that sequence. James Bond movies are great about this because like he keeps moving locations and like getting caught, and all of these things are their own sequence. You can really see them in like a James Bond movie
Yeah,
about
that's true.
there's a sequence where like he's like getting his test, and then the sequence where he's like meeting the girl, and the sequence where he's playing poker, and all of these are very like discrete sequences, and I like to think of my books in the same manner. So it's important for me to know where each, not just where the book ends, but also where each sequence ends, so that I can build and then hit a climax and then lower tension, because you can't have a book that goes consistently at 100 miles an hour. Otherwise, it would be like someone just screaming at you. You need to have that subtlety of rising and falling action. You need to have characters like deal with the consequences of what just happened to like reset, so that the audience can reset, the reader can reset, and then start again, building ever so slowly towards the major climax of the book.
Absolutely. I noticed you. I forget where I read it.
Put ever that much thought into anything.
I forget where I read it, but you had cited somewhere I was reading about you. You had cited Douglas Adams as a major influence of yours. I think the Hitchhiker's Guide. I was just telling Gord off the air there that it's the first book I ever read that made me laugh out loud. Like I'd never experienced that before. But he's a great example of what you just said. Like that whole book, it's up and down the whole time, and it's a great read. I recommend anyone who's watched the movie and not read the book, you're missing out completely.
Absolutely, but the thing about him is, so he writes absurdism, right? But his plots are very tight, and he has these very discrete sequences, which allows him to play. And I've always thought, a lot of writers or people in general think that like having structure is going to hinder creativity, but I find that having a solid structure actually improves creativity, because if people know where they're going, at least have an idea of where they're going, they're much more likely to follow the story and the tangents and the humor that you want to add in there. It's when people feel unmoored. I mean, just look at what's happening now. Like, we're kind of all unmoored in time. We have no idea what's going on. So most of the people that I know, at least, are scrambling to find any semblance of like structure in their lives. And it's the same with your readers, is your readers are looking for structure. And if you don't give them some structure to hold on to, then they'll be scrambling to find anything in the text. But if you ground them with what's going to happen, and they know where they're going, you can have a lot more freedom with how to get there.
That makes perfect sense. You mentioned just a minute ago that you never get tired of having your book in your hand. Question that's really been bugging me. I really fear the thought of libraries going the way of the video store. Where do you see print? Is print okay? Is it going to stick around for a while, or is it going to go digital before we want it to?
Well, digital, at least with traditionally published books, not our books, like independently published books, hit a wall about 2 to 3 years ago, and they've been falling ever since. Print books have made a massive comeback. Most of the publishers that I talk to still say that 90% of their sales come from print, 10% from digital. Now, that is not the same with independent publishers, but independent publishers aren't really a factor in libraries.
Right.
Most libraries are buying from traditional publishers, and traditional publishers pretty much exclusively, unless you're in Baker and Taylor or Ingram, or have some way for them to notice you. But there's 110,000 libraries in America, and every one of them seems to be going strong. I'm very I feel very buoyed by what I learned about the Great Depression, where even in the Great Depression, they lost 0 libraries. And I think that libraries are the one place in a in a town often, where you don't go with a expectation of buying anything, and
That's true.
they perform a service above just books. They also have community areas. They also have live readings. They also have computers. Some people, it's their only computer that they have, so it's how they get to job interviews, how they apply to jobs. Libraries serve a vital function to community that's much more than just books, although we tend to think of
Absolutely.
them as books. And as libraries become more of a community organizing center, then they'll become even more intrinsically linked to
Here in
to the
Vancouver, they
society.
opened
But
up.
even the
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, here in Vancouver, they've opened recording studios, just little booths. So if you're a podcaster, or if you're just like a guy who's got a song he wants to record, it's just free recording time. And it's a full on studio.
Yeah.
It's very, very cool.
Yeah, in LA, my local library has a 3D maker space, so you can go in and do 3D printing.
Oh,
Wow.
I mean, they can be really cool spaces, but from all accounts, most millennial and Gen Z people are buying books like books. They're not buying ebooks as much. So, and I see that at shows. I do most of my stuff at live conventions, but even when I look online at this last Kickstarter we're launching, somewhere between 60 and 70% of the people have bought the print book, even though it's 4 times more expensive than the digital book.
And is that the same with the? I've noticed. Well, maybe I'm just haven't been paying attention the last like 10 years or so, but it seems to me that the literary community as a whole has kind of really started to accept graphic novels as part of the library experience, part of the literary experience. Do you find it's a better reception now than you got when you started? Are they more? I hate to say credible, but
it's it's definitely more credible, especially for kids, because Raina Telgemeier and a whole bunch of others have come onto the scene to help buoy graphic novels, and there's been studies that show that graphic novels are a great way to bring children into the learning experience. Also, a lot of dyslexic and people with learning disabilities learn better from graphic novels than they actually do from print books.
There you
There's
go, Gord.
also studies that show that
It's funny that you mentioned that, because when I was in high school, I had a buddy of mine who tried to get me into some graphic novels, Spawn being one of the first early ones I remember. I just, the only comics I'd read as a kid were Archie, so getting into a graphic novel was almost intimidating for me, because I was more focused on the pictures than actually getting into the story. So it almost backfired against me, because my buddy basically sort of said the same thing. He goes, well, you don't do well in school. Try reading one of these, see what you think. I'm just like, the fucking art is awesome.
I got to go off for a second, too. I absolutely hate what they've done to Archie. This whole Riverdale, the dark, weird Riverdale thing, I can't stand it. It drives me nuts.
Well, good news is they still have the original Archie comics. My friend Dan Parent draws them, and they're
awesome.
quite good. Yes,
Oh,
they
yeah.
have a lot of other like crossovers and such, and Undead Archie and a couple of others, but like there's still the old Archie and the Riverdale gang you can still read. I recommend, if you do want to try comics, though, Gord, you read a book called Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. It got my wife into comics. It teaches you how to read comics. Comics have a very high barrier to entry, actually, because of the way that the words and the pictures work together to tell a story. A lot of people either only read the words or only look at the pictures, but it really is the molding of both of those two things together that makes a graphic novel. So Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics is what I recommend to everybody. It literally changed my wife's perception of comics. I tried to get her into comics for years, and it was the deciding factor that allowed her to appreciate comics in a way that made her love them.
I have to ask. This is probably going to bore the crap out of people.